Kevin, so we've actually been asked by our friends at Finisterre, who are putting on the C7 Ocean Activist Camp, to speak a little bit and have a chat about what we're doing with our Sea Trees program, and more, kind of generally speaking, talking about blue carbon and blue carbon ecosystems. So Sea Trees is a program created by the team at nonprofit Sustainable Surf, that's us, to reverse climate change by regenerating and protecting some of the most threatened marine ecosystems on the planet. And those include mangrove forests, kelp forests, coral reefs, seagrass, and holistic coastal watersheds. Because these natural ecosystems, they have a superpower to help reverse climate change because of their ability to soak up, massive amounts of carbon dioxide gas emissions right from the atmosphere. And depending on the ecosystem that we're talking about, that could be 5 to even 50 times more effective than a similar sized tropical rainforest on land. And in addition to sequestering or simply storing all those carbon emissions that we've actually put up there by burning fossil fuels to power our lives, right? The restoration of those ecosystems also catalyzes a chain reaction of super efficient, positive local benefits that improve water quality, biodiversity of plants and animals, economic opportunities for local communities, and the protection of coastlines from storm surges and erosion. I mean, the case in point, there's research from the United Nations Environmental Program that shows that protecting mangrove forests is actually 1,000 times cheaper per kilometer than building seawalls, right? So how can the ocean play a major part in tackling climate change?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Well, the ocean is the superhero in the story. I think it's key for people to understand just how important the ocean is in the carbon cycle. So if you take all the carbon that's in all the plants on land, all the soils, everything that lives, everything in the atmosphere, add it all up, that's less than 10% of the carbon in the carbon cycle. The other 90% is in the ocean. The ocean drives climate change, it drives everything. And because we live on land, because we're so focused on land, we often don't really think about the role of the ocean in that. So there's this thing called blue carbon that sequesters CO2 in the ocean. If we're going to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere and put it anywhere, it should go in the ocean. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with Sea Trees, is to tell that story, things start with the story and accelerate the way in which we can help the ocean do its job. Like, we're the sidekicks in the story. We don't have to do the big lift of solving climate change. Each one of us solve the whole problem, right? That sounds almost impossible. Like, you have to be a superhero to do it. Yet here we are. We can do, well, all we have to do is help the ocean do its job.
Right. Yeah. So it's like the ocean actually has the superpower to reverse climate change if we help it, if we can actually help catalyze that the natural systems that already exist, and are in place and that have been storing carbon and balancing the Earth's carbon cycle, for millennia, right? It's like, oh, right, if we just help, those systems do the job they normally do because we've haven't disrupted them, then the system can take care of itself.
Exactly. In fact, we're going to help the system take care of the problem. It can do it. It's done it in the past. We're going to speed up the Earth's own healing mechanisms. That's what needs to happen next.
So what is blue carbon, and where do we find it? What do we mean?
Blue carbon is a term that we use in terms of how the ocean can help solve climate change more specifically. So there's two ways CO2 is taken out of the atmosphere and put in the ocean. One is through chemical absorption, where just the CO2 gas gets absorbed into the water. That makes the ocean actually more acidic, and it's not a good thing. The other way to take CO2 out of the atmosphere is for the action of plants. Photosynthesis, plants both on land and in the ocean, take CO2 out of the atmosphere along with sunlight. They make it into carbohydrates, things that you can eat, whether you're a human or a fish or a critter or something in the ocean. Right. So blue carbon are those photosynthetic ecosystems that absorb CO2 through the action of water-based plants. So what's an example of a blue carbon ecosystem? A mangrove forest is a really good example. So mangroves are trees that literally live in the sea. They live in brackish estuaries that are salty, and water flows in from upstream, fresh water, mixes with the sea, and the mangroves live in that area. And because it's in a sedimentary environment, they sequester vast amounts of carbon in the mud and the soil. And not only the soil, but then a lot of that carbon dissolves out and flows into the local ocean nearby, usually a coral reef. And it's shown that with a healthy mangrove forest, the coral reefs and other ecosystems around them are even more healthy as well. Kelp forests are another example. So kelp is an algae that grows in shallow coastal waters, temperate oceans. And it's one of the fastest growing plants in the world. It can grow up to 2 feet per day in optimal conditions. And because it grows so fast, it absorbs a lot of CO2. And then kelp tends to break. And then when it breaks, it floats somewhere out into the ocean, and it sinks into the deep ocean. So it's actually sequestering CO2 directly into the deep ocean, which is the largest carbon sink out of the carbon cycle. Other examples really quickly are like coastal watersheds, basically land-based ecosystems that often have mangroves and coral reefs at their base, or coral reefs or seagrass meadows. All of these are good examples of plants that live in highly productive environments that can sequester CO2 quite rapidly.
Kevin, so why don't we talk about the threats to those blue carbon coastal ecosystems that you were just talking about? Why are they in bad shape? What's going on? What is threatening their ability to soak up and store that carbon for us?
Yeah, it's a combination of both human impacts and climate change. Climate change is essentially the knockout blow, but these ecosystems are under threat all over the world just from human impacts of development, overfishing, logging, and other things that you might not even think about are impacts that actually create a problem. So for example, mangrove forests have lost 50% of their extent globally in the last 50 years. And that's not just due to logging, it's also due to clearing of mangrove forests to make shrimp ponds and other kinds of aquaculture actually take out mangroves, and they don't come back once that impact has happened. So restoring mangroves is a large global movement that can have a major benefit in restoring both biodiversity and fighting climate change. Kelp forests are really interesting, especially to Michael and myself. We live in California, and California has lost 80% of its kelp cover. In the last 10 years, Northern California has lost 95% of its kelp. And
That's
a
right.
very sudden, dramatic decline that has hit the international news in the last few years, and especially in the last couple of months. There's been a lot of papers and studies on that. It's a dramatic loss, and that's a combination again of both human impacts and climate change, where some key predators for the sea urchins, which live in the kelp forest and is an essential part of the kelp forest, were taken out. Like sea otters are basically missing from the majority of California's kelp forests. And then climate change came around, and it created a sea star wasting disease. So these giant sunflower stars are large 20-armed starfish that move rapidly and are voracious eaters of sea urchins. And they all disappeared.
Yeah, but Kevin, didn't that actually happen from the marine heat wave that was actually caused by climate change, right? So it was that warm water blob that sat off our west coast right here off of San Francisco, right? So that actually led to the disease on the starfish. And then once they were wiped out, then the purple sea urchins had no predators left anymore, right?
Exactly. And then suddenly the kelp forests all disappeared. And essentially what's happened is when the ecosystems, these beautiful biodiverse ecosystems, are stressed out to the max by human impacts and by climate change, they often collapse. And that's what's happening around the world, is these collapsing ecosystems. The good news is that they can be restored, and there's many techniques to do it. It's not rocket science. It's science to basically make things grow. So what we're doing is we're identifying the best blue carbon restoration projects that on the planet that we can find that need support. And Michael and I both have a background in carbon offset development, back from the early 2000s. We're taking those techniques of sort of rigorous project evaluation and monitoring and applying them to kelp forest restoration, which doesn't have a carbon methodology, but we're finding the project developers who are out there actually who live in the area. They're typically non-NGOs and scientists who have developed a technique to restore their local ecosystem, which they know the most about. We help them do that work by helping them find the essential funding to pay for the work to restore those ecosystems, and then take that work that they've done and tell that story to the individuals and the brand partners who want to see that work happen. The science on kelp carbon sequestration is fairly new. It's very promising. It shows that kelp sequesters potentially more carbon than mangrove forests do globally. But in terms of being able to quantify it in a rigorous manner from any particular project, that science is in its infancy. And we're currently working on the proposal to actually make this happen. It would be a 2-year study to go in and measure carbon coming off of kelp, to sediment cores, to oceanographic modeling, many different techniques that you would apply to figuring out how much carbon is coming off those kelp forests and floating into the ocean and being permanently sequestered.
Our project down in Palos Verdes, is basically the model, the case study for enabling that to happen, right?
It is actually the most successful kelp restoration project in the world. And they've been restoring kelp in Palos Verdes for quite a number of years, several decades. And then this latest effort started about 5 years ago. And they just published their first paper showing that when they restore a kelp forest, it basically becomes indistinguishable from a healthy forest within 5 years. And in 1 year, you actually have a fully mature kelp forest because it grows so fast. So it's actually quite a good example of how humans can restore ecosystems in a very positive way.
What are some of the coolest, newest projects that we've been adding to our portfolio in this year?
Yeah, so one of the really exciting ones is in Bali. It's a coral reef restoration project, restoring 2,000 square meters of coral reef that's been degraded by tourism. Essentially, tourists come to visit this black magic temple, and for years and years, the tourist boats, their anchors and the buoys that they attached to just destroyed this section of beautiful, pristine reef. So
Right.
we've got a restoration partner who's going out there, who's an expert in coral reef restoration, to go in and restore this reef. We're actually working with scripts as well to image how that reef goes. So you can actually bring cameras and swim a reef with images, high resolution photographs, and create a full 3D model of a reef. And from those images, you can actually conduct very interesting science to show how coral reef restoration occurs. What are the best ways to put different types of coral species together to create a biodiverse reef that's more resilient to other impacts in the future. We've also got a project in Kenya. It's a mangrove restoration project to plant 1 million trees in Mita Creek, which is a national park in Kenya, which really depended on tourism for the income for all the local population. And because of COVID, that income source was lost. So there had been quite a bit of deforestation going on just to survive, from the local inhabitants. So we're actually able to come in and through our brand partners to fund this restoration project to plant 1 million trees and put 350 people to work restoring this mangrove forest.
Yeah, and I know I'm looking forward once the travel restrictions actually open back up to going to the UK and in Europe, because we've been looking at seagrass projects over there, and that's one of our next investments that we're hoping to make in our blue carbon portfolio, right? So super psyched about that. The last question I'll take, which is how can people in the Finisterre audience get involved with Sea Trees after hearing all this? Well, come visit our website and actually learn more about all the blue carbon ecosystems that we support and why they're so critical to protecting ocean health. Once you're there, you can help us reforest the ocean by planting your own sea trees right from the website. And obviously, make sure to follow us on social media to stay informed and hopefully entertained and stoked by everything that our engaged community throughout the world is doing to protect our ocean planet. So with that, Kevin, good to see you. I'll see you next time I'm down in LA. And thanks to the whole crew at Finisterre and our friends at Protect Blue for inviting us to be a part of this.
Nice. Kevin, Michael, welcome to C7 live here from Cornwall. Good to see you.
Great to see you, Dan.
Dan.
Present and ready.
Amazing. So listen, you've just folks have just got a good insight into your work and why it's happening and what it's doing out there. And we're going to go into a bit of a UK focus shortly. and to really bring your work into the context of folks who live on these islands. I just wanted to start with a couple of questions, really. One was, when I've seen, Michael, we met a couple of years back, and you were just, it was just starting to bubble up, the Sea Trees project. And one thing that always fascinated me about the work you guys do is the role of communities in the work, that you're working with real people in real places that are kind of involved in sort of building these new systems. And I just wondered, when I look at, all the issues we're facing right now with climate, and so much of this, this G7 talks about top-down power systems and how do we change the systems, and you guys are learning so much working with people. And I just wondered, that feels like this kind of building and co-creating with people on the ground is going to be a big part of this future. And I just wonder if we could just riff a little bit on what you've learned from that.
Yeah, well, we live and die by one word, Dan. Collaboration, really. You know what I mean? Like that is how things get done. Historically, in the nonprofit space, collaboration hasn't been such a hot thing. People trying to stay in their own little zones or be protective or whatever else. We've totally flipped that. The work that we do, literally, collaboration is the core value into this, right? And if we talk about the Sea Trees program, right? Every single project that we invest in is a community-led project. Right, so we're not coming into Cambodia, parachuting in, or Indonesia or Kenya. We're actually working with those local nonprofit NGO groups, grassroots groups that are on the ground, and the work that's actually done of planting the mangroves, doing the seedlings, doing the mapping, the reporting, all that kind of stuff. It's all done by the community. By the community leaders and by the individuals in that community. So what this does is it's actually putting the economic engine to work right there, right? So we are empowering people through the dignity of work to be the stewards in their own ecosystem. So it's actually not about us, it's about them and them becoming the good stewards of these places.
I love that.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, total sense. And I just think, because, we're talking about this kind of change and how people can sort of move into access. And I guess this world of dealing with these crises that we're facing, this idea that actually, these co-creating these systems on the ground with people just feels like a big ingredient to this world that we're trying to bring on. And I think you guys are just, that's how you're building this model, right? So I just think it could be this kind of approach, it feels like could be, utilized across a lot of the different issues that the ocean is facing.
Yeah, we all bring our own strengths, to the issue at hand, right? Even just us as an organization. I'm coming from the real activist, boots on the ground, communication, like how to get people excited in this. And my partner Kevin is really bringing in the science side of it. He's actually he's the actual scientist for us, and. And having those two combinations of being excited, being passionate, being able to bring people together to do something, and then actually knowing what to do because of what science actually tells you, that really is sort of the key here. Those two groups historically have also been in two different camps, right? The scientists are doing this incredible work and no one knows about it and they know how to talk about it. And the activists are, doing all kinds of stuff and, marching around in dolphin suits and whatever else, without the connection to how do we actually make this happen in reality on the ground. Bringing those two things together is what we've done as an organization, and we think it's the future.
Amazing. So listen, we're gonna dive in a minute into the UK context and some of the work that we can speak to. But just on that, because I think there's again, this is a theme that we're sort of hearing across these different issues, and I think what you guys are doing so well, this language that you've used, and you talked about this engagement alongside the science, but even this idea of sea trees and rewilding the ocean and reforesting, and it feels like that's really capturing people. Are you finding that? Is it really helping to bring more people into this?
Yeah, and I don't know about the conversation here, kind of from Kevin as well, but let me just say this. It's like, if Kevin would have his way, he'd be talking about, well, these are endemic blue carbon ecosystems in the marine, spatial area, right? All of which is absolutely true.
But I take that concept and go, how do we relate it to people? Let's call the program Sea Trees, right? And like those kinds of shifts, thinking about how people are going to be onboarded to the idea that you're talking about, that is absolutely key. If we don't bring people with us, then another 20 or 30 years of the scientists saying, here's what the science is saying, your hair should be on fire, is going to continue unless we bring it and say, hey, here's what it actually means to you, and here's how we can actually activate this as a solution, and here's how you can be involved. Now, Kevin,
Amazing.
did I leave anything out?
Actually, you know what? The hair on fire comment's a good one. My hair was on fire in the 90s. I was doing my graduate work in Antarctica, studying climate change in the 1990s, and like we were talking about the slowing thermohaline circulation, otherwise known as the Gulf Stream, that's going to make UK a lot colder soon. It's already slowing down dramatically back in the early 90s. And my hair's been on fire ever since, right? That's why I work in climate change. But what I realized, and Michael and I together, as we became friends and decided to start Sustainable Surf, we realized the story was all wrong about how we engage people. And it really needs to be more nature focused, has to have indigenous wisdom combined with modern science to develop these solutions that can speed up fast enough to match the rate of climate change, which is accelerating.
Yes, and we're hearing this as well. Again, just, you know, we sort of lived in this kind of binary, divisive culture of recent, where it's kind of like, you know, you either got to be this or that. But this idea of sort of bringing these different, you know, these ancient wisdoms with these modern technologies, with science.
We can have it all, Dan.
Absolutely, we need it all. We need it all. Smash it all up, and we sort of. So listen, we're gonna just before I've got one more question actually, and this is I'd love to the sort of geekery of what you do. I was curious about like what we're hearing. When we're looking at land-based, I guess our understanding, say, of you know, trees on land, and we're starting to understand more and more about these, you know, they call it the, you know, the wide web, these kind of intimate relationships between like mycelium and trees and all this amazing stuff, which kind of like humans have no idea about, right? But is that, are you finding, does that exist at sea as well? Is that, you know, you finding anything out about this kind of stuff out in the ocean?
You know, there's a ancient wisdom term, Kevin, called as above, so below, right? And, you know, I didn't come up with it, but I absolutely love it, and I use it all the time. You may not know this, and most people in the UK probably don't know this, but there's more acreage of underwater kelp forests in the UK than there is on land. You realize that?
No.
And over here in our kelp forest in California, it's habitat for over 750 species in the kelp forest. You guys have the exact same thing there. You know, Kevin can speak to how these ecosystems are stacked on top of it, and how the kelp forest is actually the foundation of these things that essentially feed everything from the invertebrates to you know, crabs, whatever, fishes, whales, seals, dolphins. Everything is connected in that kelp forest. And when the structure of the kelp forest, meaning the, you know, the actual like brown algae itself that makes the forest, if that's gone, then you've lost the habitat for all of that biodiversity, as well as the carbon sink, as well as all of the key marine UK fisheries that the juvenile fish actually have their life cycle in the kelp forest. So no kelp forest, no fish, man, and no fisheries.
Yeah, we this interconnectedness that we I love it. This interconnectedness that's kind of like blowing our minds. This is what we've got to get used to these days. The story of separation is over. But let's get into the UK now, because this this event C7, right? I mean, it's been mindfully put together as much as you can. The impact of it has been really kind of like considered and thought out. But of course, it has still emissions and impacts and all that kind of stuff. But sea trees are going to be helping us out with this, right? Can you speak a bit to that, and then we could speak about how your work is going to roll out in the UK and Europe?
Yeah, definitely. So pretty clear. Like you said, Kevin and I didn't fly over from California, so we've saved a bunch of carbon that way. But it is a hybrid event, and it does have an emissions footprint. That's being calculated, and we are going to be offsetting, or as we like to say, wiping out that carbon footprint through our Sea Trees program. What does that mean? It actually means what are the ecosystem projects that we have in our portfolio that are going to be doing the hard work of actually doing that? Kevin, you want to pick that one up and just talk about the 3 projects real quick?
Yeah, so the part of the vision of C-Trees is that we're supporting blue carbon projects around the world. We've got 6 in our platform right now, hoping to get to be 100. And those carbon projects are being integrated in our C-Trees token. So it's a blended carbon offset product. If you have, say, 100 tons of emissions and buy 100 C-Trees tokens, that would then offset, or a better term that we like is to wipe out that footprint with 100 tons of VCS certified carbon credits from a Southern Cardamom Rainforest project in Cambodia, which is one of the best REDD+ projects that we've ever seen. And it's a coastal watershed, so it actually runs right into the ocean where there's mangrove forests at the base and then coral reefs just offshore. Incredibly healthy ecosystem, and provides over 1,000 jobs in sustainable development, protection of nature species, and so on. On top of that, we actually add a new piece, and we call it our Blue Carbon Investment Fund, which is planting 4 mangrove trees in our Biak Island project in Indonesia, and restoring 1 square foot of kelp forest in our Palos Verdes project in California. And the idea behind that is that those projects take in additional CO2, sequesters additional 1 ton of CO2 over its lifetime. Now, it's not certified, but the point is these projects aren't ready to be certified yet they still need funding now if they're going to even get to the point of being certified as an offset project. And so that investment fund allows C-Trees and our partners to actually help them get to the point of carbon offsets. And one final piece on that is we're currently working on a science proposal to basically do the most comprehensive analysis of carbon coming off of a kelp forest and creating the first methodology around wild kelp conservation.
And that's actually with the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, right, Kevin?
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so
yeah.
Yeah. And so what about, and tell me about like, what's actually going on? Because these projects you're doing currently, and what's the plans for places like the UK and Europe? Are we seeing this around here? Are we going to see things happening?
Yeah, Dan. So the short story is we're all in the same boat, man. So the scientists have basically said that the kelp forests around the UK are predicted to be gone, wiped out completely in the next 100 years. That's because of climate change, right? We can't let that happen. Literally, it's the foundation of the economic engine for your entire island nation, right?
Does Boris Johnson know this? Is he aware? I don't know he is.
Not yet, but it's undeniable, and it's actually coming. And what they're already seeing right now, Dan, is this shift in the southern water. So basically, there are southern water brown kelp that is like a short sort of understory, and that's all now moving north to the larger kelp forests up in Scotland, right? And there's a shift here happening that's undeniable because of warmer water due to climate change. And what they're finding out is that in those shorter understory kelp forests, there's actually less fish, less juvenile fish, and less productivity, right? So we know that we need to be coming in there and trying to support game-changing blue carbon projects happening around the UK. That's actually what we're exploring right now. The Seagrass project folks are doing great things. Kevin, what's that other project that's on the east side that you heard about?
In Tyneside, yeah, it's a combination of kelp forest restoration, seagrass meadow restoration, and oyster farming. And the idea is to protect against climate change and coastal erosion, sequester CO2, and actually produce mariculture, fisheries.
Yeah, hey, Dan, so back to your point of like, how do we connect all this stuff together? They don't live in silos, in the tropics in Biak, it's the mangrove forest, the seagrass meadows in the lagoon, and the coral reefs. They're not separate systems, they're actually all together, right? So we're super interested in trying to find projects that we can support in a meaningful way there. For the existing UK and EU-based companies like Oliver Brown here, who Kevin is actually doing the carbon footprint for their entire organization and all their products, and we're going to be wiping it out with C-Trees. Basically, we want to do that all across the UK with leading brands, and also obviously with Finisterre, because they are our favorite UK brand, period.
And so
yeah, Tom.
And so thinking about our listeners and our community that are tuning into this, and how can folks tap into what you're doing? How can they get involved? What are the actions they could take? What are the options now to sort of to lean into sea trees?
Yeah, pretty simple. So we've made it incredibly easy for anyone to wipe out their own carbon impact, their own climate impact from what they're doing, right? So we all live our lives. We fly, we drive, we power our homes, we buy things, right? We have to actually make that mental shift of like, oh, I can do that and I can pollute in that carbon. I can put that carbon up into the air, which then goes into the ocean, right? And it's free. Like, it doesn't cost me anything. We actually have to have that mind shift. It does actually cost you. Those are not externalities, right? That is something that you can do something about. And in this particular moment right now, what we're asking people to do is calculate that footprint. In fact, we've already done that for you. You can go to our website in about 30 seconds and start restoring kelp forests, planting mangrove trees, wiping out your own carbon impact by protecting existing ridge to reef watershed projects, right? And that should be the easiest thing to do. And we should be doing that first, not waiting until everything else. And then additionally, looking for all the ways in your life, starting with how you get around, the food that you eat, how you give back in your own community. And that looks different everywhere everyone else is, right? We don't have enough time to go into that, but yes, we also have the 50 things that you can do to reduce your impact. But the new narrative that we're trying to really get out there is to say, you need to be doing that and wiping out your carbon footprint right now directly through these ecosystems that are doing the hard work on carbon, but providing all of these other ecosystem, social, economic benefits.
Amazing. So listen, we're thinking about the G7 going on down the coast. We're thinking about these world leaders. If you had an hour now with those world leaders, what would you do? What would you say when it comes to the work you're trying to do? What would the message be?
Yeah, my message for all the world leaders out there is that the biggest problem in the world that you have literally is a dead ocean. Everything we do is dependent on that. Our economic systems, cultural systems. I mean, you want to talk about the collapse of everything. It comes with the collapse of the oceans. And we're seeing the oceans being impacted in absolutely dramatic ways, right? 90% of the heat caused by global warming, human caused, right now has been soaked up by the oceans. That's why we're not living in an inferno, Dan. Right now, if the oceans hadn't done that, the average temperature on the planet would be 122 degrees Fahrenheit, not 57 like it is right now, right? So we're already pushing these ocean ecosystems to their brink, to a tipping point, as David Attenborough would actually say. And we have to back away from that, and we have to regenerate and invest back in those ecosystems. That is the most important thing that they can do. Otherwise, they've never seen a problem like the one that's coming.
Kevin, any final thoughts for you?
Well, Michael's comment is pretty good. It's really kind of about reframing the value of people who protect and restore ecosystems. In indigenous cultures, they were highly valued for the ability to do that. And our Western society doesn't really do that well enough. Yet they're the ones that actually help us guide the way to fixing these problems. And we can regenerate the Earth's oceans and suck out all the CO2 we've emitted quite quickly if we blend this indigenous wisdom and modern science together. And that would be the thing I'd ask him to do.
Amazing. Michael, Kevin, we're gonna close it up now. It's been amazing to have you here. The work you do is awesome, and I would recommend everyone just to check out Sea Trees, follow these guys, and get involved. Right? Let's rewild the ocean.
Let's rewild the ocean. Dan, come on back and let's go surfing again. So stoked to be here. Hats off to Tom and the team at Protect Blue for throwing all this together. Thanks for having us. And
we'll be in touch.
We'll see you next time.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Lots of love. Bye.